Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April 3rd edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to take a look at some races from Oaklawn Park and Gulfstream. At Oaklawn, we're going to handicap the late pick 4 on Saturday, races 7 through 10, featuring the Purple Martin Stakes, the only real major stakes race taking place this week around the country. And at Gulfstream Park, we'll handicap 2 allowance races on their Saturday card. Craig, I've got to say, I'm happy that there's still racing continuing in some parts of the country, and we're seeing this phenomenon now where a lot of different barns are shipping into these 2 circuits, and they're really beefing up these cards, making for some interesting races to discuss.
Yeah, there sure are. So these races are tough, I think. They're really handicapping challenges. As you said, we got horses coming from all over, trainers running in places you normally wouldn't expect. And I'll be honest, you picked out the races this week, and we usually collaborate, and I like them all. And looking at them, there's some real head scratchers, some horses I like, and I'm really looking forward to talking about it.
Yeah, I would say the Oaklawn races are particularly tough, and we'll start there with that late pick 4, beginning in race 7. It's an allowance race, non-winners of one event, going 6 furlongs for the fillies and mares, and this one seems pretty wide open. I think the conversation has to start with the number 3, Marianne or Ginger. You probably remember we talked about this horse on the TimeformUS Pacecast all the way back last summer on that Belmont Stakes week when she made her debut in the Astoria for Jeremiah Englehart, and she got the job done that day over Perfect Alibi, who went on to be one of the best 2-year-old fillies of her generation, at least through the summer at Saratoga. But Marianne Ginger has been off for a long time, and what do you think we get off the layoff from her?
Yeah, I wasn't sure what to do with her. I mean, she's obviously a contender, and here she's a morning line favorite. They threw her right in a stake first time out. But when I looked up Jeremiah Englehart stakes and or stats in Formulator, they're just not very good with horse 3-year-olds coming off of this kind of layoff. I think he was 1 for 15 with a really bad ROI. I think the one winner he had was a short price favorite. So while I certainly think she can win, she's a horse that I want to take a shot against. How do you feel about her?
Yeah, I liked her debut well enough in the sense that she overcame some trouble that day because she didn't break that well from the rail, and then she got steadied out of position, leaving the backstretch when they broke for the turn. So for a first-time starter in a stakes race, I thought she did well to overcome that bit of trouble. But do also keep in mind that entire Belmont Stakes week from about Thursday through Saturday was a time when the main track was really favoring horses down on the inside, and she did ride the rail for most of her trip before going off it briefly in the stretch and then going back down to it at about the 8th pole. So she might have benefited from the way the track was playing a little bit, whereas Perfect Alibi, who was second in that race, she was wide the entire way. That said, with routine improvement from her 2-year-old to 3-year-old season, she might be good enough to beat this field if she's just taken that step forward. It remains to be seen, though. I do think we have to discuss the pace of this race a little bit because there is plenty of speed signed on. I mean, I guess horses like In the Midst of Biz and Take Charge Eric are going to go from the inside and Wishful Quality from the outside. I could see it heating up a bit on the front end, so I wanted to look for a horse that was going to come from off the pace and go in a different direction from Marianne or Ginger. So I was looking at the number 10 Super Wonder Girl. She's just made 2 starts on the dirt, but it really seems like she might prefer the dirt to the synthetic surfaces that she began her career on. And I liked her last race at Keeneland quite a bit. I know it came all the way back in October, but she took a good late run that day at horse What a Fox, who's a decent runner, who's I think done okay after that. Even her prior start at Churchill Downs wasn't bad. Now she's making her 4-year-old debut, and it seems like she's going to get some pace to close into. So if she's a bit of a price in this race, I thought she might be one to take a look at.
Yeah, I kind of had similar thinking, but with a couple different horses. I want to look for a horse who's going to come from off the pace. This is a race where the pace projector think it's going to be fast. And looking through the past performances, I have no argument with that. There are a lot of horses that like to be right on or near that lead when they run their best. The horses I was looking at, one I particularly like is Dolce Ride. He's a Brad Cox trained, or she's a Brad Cox trained filly. Actually a mare now, the 5-year-old. She It's one who ran for him first time last out a couple weeks ago. She's been running longer races, but that first time off the layoff, it really isn't one of Brad Cox's strong points. And when I watched the race, she didn't have a great trip. She was chasing the pace 3 wide. She wound up 3 wide around both turns. She actually won the pace stool. It was also in the mud, I should mention, but the race totally melted down. The top 3 all came from well back, but I'm willing to give her a pass on that. I like that he wheels her right back in a couple weeks. He cuts back in distance, and I think she's going to get a nice setup. The other one I was interested in here is Cardamom for Bill Mott. She's a horse who has solid figures. She's coming off a bit of a layoff, but Bill Mott has really good numbers with these types, 3-year-olds coming off of dirt or coming off a layoff on the dirt. And she's a 4-year-old, actually, I should say. But yeah, I kind of like her on the turn back as well. She's a horse who hasn't proven the need to lead. She did lead going a mile at Churchill, but in her sprint races, she was a bit off the pace. So those are the 2 I settled on.
Yeah, Dolce Ride was one of the horses that I had trouble making up my mind about because, like you said, she didn't get the best setup last time in that return at Oaklawn, but she also didn't run well. And I think she's facing a comparable field here, and she's going to have to do a lot better off a trainer change that she was supposed to do better last time. So maybe the turn back helps her a little bit, but it's not like she hasn't been in good barns before because she was with Richard Baltus back in 2018. So I was a little iffy on her. I would probably use her as a backup, but I wanted to go in a different direction. I have no problem with Cardamom. I mean, in my opinion, she's one of the horses to beat in this race. I think if Cardamom gets back to her debut effort at Churchill, which was really good, she's going to be tough in this spot, and she's got a really nice pedigree. She's a half to Emollient and Hofburg, so this is a Juddmonte filly that's really bred to be a good one if she can ever get sorted out because she had some gait trouble last year. We'll see if that's a problem going 6 furlongs in this race, but I definitely think she has the talent to beat this field.
Yeah, my one concern with her, the reason I didn't go with her on top is just the 6 furlongs. I think might just be a little too short, but given the pace in this race, if it's ever going to be a good distance for her, it would be Saturday.
Let's move on to race 8, which is an allowance optional claiming race going a mile and a 16th for the 3-year-olds. I believe actually 3-year-olds and just 3-year-olds. And this race, I think, while the horse is only listed at 3-1 in the morning line, feels like Answer In is going to be a prohibitive favorite in this race because he's coming out of the Southwest last time, finishing behind Silver Prospector and Wells Bayou, who, of course, came back and won the Louisiana Derby in his next start. And Answer In, while he was third by quite a margin that day, he ran fine, and he basically maintained his speed figure, actually improved a little bit, and his prior form was really solid. He's just way the horse to beat in this spot, right?
Yeah, if you could get the 3-1 now for anybody out there, I would take it. Obviously, that's not an option here in the States, and I doubt anybody would be silly enough to offer that kind of price. But he's a horse who is the best last race speed figure by several points. He exits at third place finish, as you said, in the Southwest. And personally, as a pace figure guy, he had a nightmare trip that day. The pace was pretty hot. He was really wide around the first turn. He continued wide around the second turn. And even despite that, he was the one that was actually challenging Wells Bayou at the top of the stretch. He obviously faded late, but I think it was understandable. He's a horse who's been improving each time out on the speed figure scale, and I just don't really have any knocks against him. If I'm going to play a pick 4 in here, he could very well be a single, but I'm certainly not going to go very deep in that race. The one horse who I'm a little surprised on the morning line, we've already talked about the one with Answer In, is the horse right outside of him in Winning Impression. He's listed as the second choice at 7-2, and that's a horse I don't like at all. I don't see any way I would use him on my tickets. He's a horse who was right there on a slow pace, and he still faded late last time. He doesn't have speed figures to compete, so I'm totally against him in this spot. If I were going to use the second horse, I would look a little bit further inside to the number 3 General Trev for Steve Asmussen. He's a horse that won first time out going a mile for him. He got 100 TimeformUS speed figure. It is a pretty big gap back to up to Answer In's 113, but this is a move Steve Asmussen does really well with, stretching out off a debut win. He clicks at 31% with a 2.37 ROI, so he would be the other one for me.
Yeah, we have pretty similar feelings about this race. I don't have a whole lot to add to what you said about Ansarin. He was improving with every start, and that was just a tough field last time. I wouldn't say the trip was maybe quite as bad as you thought it was. He was wide the entire way. I still thought he had his shot at the top of the stretch. And the one thing I didn't like about his Southwest performance was once Javier Castellano took the whip out and tried to get into him at about the 3/16 pole, this horse got to lugging in really badly. He was extremely green through the stretch of that race and just was reacting very badly to the use of the whip. So that's a tendency I don't like to see in a lightly raced horse. Hopefully he gets over that. Maybe it won't matter because he's just superior to this field. But with a heavy favorite, you want to see them run straight at the very least. And the other horse for me, I agree, would be General Trev. I don't like Winning Impression at all, and I don't think he's going to be that short of a price in this race. But General Trev seems like the one with upside for all the reasons you mentioned. That was an extremely fast pace that he made that move into last time, and he held on pretty well. Hunt the Front, who was second, closed from way off the pace. I think he was last early. That's a Nick Zito horse who I actually think has some ability. So I don't think that was a bad maiden race that he's coming out of. He's got to improve, but I think he's the one with upside. Finnick the Fierce, I guess, is another horse you could look at, but he's just such a plotter. And there is a fast pace predicted by the pace projector, but take note that the horse that's predicted to be on the lead is General Trev, and he wasn't a front runner in his debut. He's just coming out of a fast-paced race. And when you look through this field, there are a few front runners, but it doesn't seem to me like the kind of race that's necessarily going to produce a pace meltdown. So I would be a little hesitant to upgrade a horse like Finnick the Fierce.
Yeah, I agree. He's just a plotter for me, the kind of horse I very rarely ever bet. I do like that you mentioned the pace projector in here. That's something we're definitely going to be studying during these slow times. The field size thing seems to be boosting these races to fast pace a little more than for my liking, I should say. I see a lot of times where I just don't believe it. Big fields certainly lead to faster pace races, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be crazy when you don't have a lot of speed in the race. So we'll definitely be visiting that in the slower days ahead.
One more horse I want to mention, not necessarily as a win candidate. Maybe if you're playing the pick four, you might use him as like a C if you're doing an ABC wager, or use him underneath maybe a horse like Ansarin and Trenel Trev in the trifecta. Is the number 10 Adar. Again, I don't know if he's good enough to win this race, but this is an interesting claim by Tom Amos. This horse really started to improve in the prior barn of Daniel Pites, and I thought his last race was visually impressive. I know he was just beating maiden claimers, but this seems like a horse that's turned the corner, and he's got real route pedigree on the dam side. So just interesting that Tom Amos was getting so aggressive with this horse because he does have excellent numbers off the claim. So just wanted to take a look at a much bigger price in this race before we move on.
Yeah, and his 100 TimeformUS speed figure last out isn't bad. It's actually the same as General Trev ran. I was just more thinking we'd wait for this horse going a mile and a half on turf.
Good bait. Let's move on to race 9, which is the Purple Martin Stakes, going 6 furlongs for the 3-year-old fillies. And this is a really interesting stakes race, and one that could have major ramifications on some of the bigger graded stakes events later in the year, because there are plenty of those when we actually get there, races like the Test at Saratoga, because a lot of these fillies in this listed stakes race are already running speed figures that are going to be good enough to win races like that. First and foremost, I think we have to start with the two horses coming off blowout wins, those being the number 4 Edgeway, who won her debut last time very impressively for John Sadler, and the number 8 Frank's Roquette, who was just dazzling winner of the Any Limit last time, beating a weaker group down at Gulfstream, but she certainly did it the right way in her 3-year-old debut, and she had 2-year-old form to back it up. So I think they're the two favorites in this race, but there are plenty of others to consider as well.
Yeah, for me, it came down to, it was a big 3 for me, if you want to throw in Kamari. Kamari ran a monster dirt race as a 2-year-old at Keeneland, then was moved to turf. I think she actually wound up going off the favorite in that Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf, ran 4th that day. I am a little leery of that big dirt figure she ran at her debut. It was in one of those 4.5 furlong races at Keeneland, which are always tough to make figures. I do the best I can with them, but you just never know. And there's not a, she won by so much that day, it's hard to go back and say, yeah, that figure was right or it was wrong, because the other horses in the field have run back to what they run, but they were also destroyed that day. So really tough to get a gauge on them. For me, it kind of comes down to those 3. Edgeway and Frank's Rocket both ran big final time figures last out. I think Edgeway was a 120, whereas Frank's Rocket was a 112. They're bumped down quite a bit on our TimeformUS speed figures, which is something, if you haven't listened to the Pacecast from Tuesday, we talked about, and that is going to change soon. You'll see some of these change retroactively just for 2020. I'm not going to go back years and years and redo all the algorithms for those, but it's something that research has shown that the racing's changed a bit, and I'm going to base these horses on their final time figures. So for me, it comes down to those three. I don't really have any strong opinion on any of them. It is a good trainer move for John Sadler when he moves right from a maiden win into a next time out, even a stake. He's only done it twice, but he's run first and second in those spots. With next out maiden winners, it's a really good stat for him as well. So if I had to make a top pick, it would be Edgeway. But again, any of these three could win for me. I am curious to hear who else you like in here, because I didn't see much else that interested me.
Kamari to me is kind of the wild card in this race, and I'm inclined generally to take a shot against these horses because it does feel like Kamari is going to attract some support here. I mean, she was one of the favorites of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf Sprint last year against the Colts, so that's obviously is a horse with a following. She was so impressive in that dirt race, and I agree with what you said about those 4.5 furlong races not always being predictive, but she is a daughter of Munnings, who is as versatile a sire as they come. He seems to get dirt routers just as easily as he gets turf sprinters, which is no surprise given that he's a son of Speightstown. And Kamari struck me as a horse that really can run over anything. She handled that soft turf course at Ascot seemingly just as well as she handled the dirt at Keeneland. So I think she's pretty versatile. It seems like Wesley Ward's had this horse everywhere. She was training at Palm Meadows, Gulfstream Park West, Turfway Park, then Keeneland, seemingly at a different venue every week, which is typical of Wesley Ward, seemingly moving his horses around all the time. But I feel like she's going to take some money in this race, and she was just one of the ones I didn't totally trust. Edgeway is a difficult call for me because she does feel like one that's going to be among the favorites in this race, if not the outright favorite over Frank's Rocket. And her debut speed figure, while it's not wrong within the context of the day because the race did come up extremely fast compared to the others that day. It was the first race of the day. And I know something that we've talked about sometime in the past is that sometimes the first race of the day can be an outlier. And if you look up the second place finisher in that race, Cynical Girl, she got an 88 TimeformUS speed figure in her debut, a 105 in this race behind Edgeway, and she's the only horse that's run back out of this race. She came back a few weeks ago, and she got an 88 TimeformUS speed figure coming out of this race. So that was consistent with her debut, not her effort against Edgeway. And it just makes me wonder a little bit about the speed figure for this race. It does hold up for the other horses with prior form coming in, but it's just something to watch moving forward. And Edgeway is going to have to face a bit more pace pressure in this race because there are other horses with speed here. She's shown to be in front on the pace projector, but she did benefit from a slow pace first time out, relatively speaking. So if she gets more pressure this time against the tougher field, perhaps that could mess with her a little bit. And I just think Frank's Rocket is the more reliable option because Frank's Rocket can easily stalk the pace. I like the outside post position. I thought she was super impressive last time, beating that field at Gulfstream Park. Like you were saying, I would put a lot more stock in that final time speed figure that she got. And to me, based even on the 2-year-old form, she just looks like the right option in here. So I would lean pretty heavily on Frank's Rocket.
Yeah, no problem with that. And I totally agree with your assessment of the speed figure. At this point, I wouldn't say it's a wrong speed figure, and I'm not saying you're saying that either, but it's always good to be skeptical of them because these things aren't science, especially when it's the first race of the day. And as we all know, speed figures get bet at the window. So if you do have reason to bet against them, I say go for it. I'm not in love with Edgeway despite that 120 TimeformUS, but as I said, I do have trouble getting past those top three just because of the huge gap in speed figures to everybody else.
Yeah, and I know you asked if there was any other horse that I would consider, and there is. The number 6, Lexi on the Move, is a horse that I don't want to totally discount in this race, especially if the pace really heats up, which it seems like that's a possibility because maybe Edgeway is just the speed of the speed. I'm not so sure about that because the 5 has speed. Frank's Rocket is not going to be far off the pace. The outside horse has some speed. We'll see if Ringleader shows more speed from the inside because she was very headstrong in some races early on. Even Kamari, when she's on her game, she's a horse that can have plenty of speed if she can learn how to get out of the gate again. So I could see a situation where Lexi on the Move, who's not some deep closer, but she can pass horses. Maybe she gets the right kind of setup. And since I've got some questions about Kamari and Edgeway, I might even go so far as to play an exacta with Frank's Rocket over Lexi on the Move because I think she's got some ability. We'll close things out with the 10th race at Oaklawn Park, close out the pick 4 sequence, I should say. And this one's quite a doozy. There's no clear favorite in this race. You've got a bunch of horses who have already had plenty of chances at this maiden special weight level and have just picked up minor checks. It's hard to even know where to start. Which horses were you leaning towards?
Well, with a big field of 12, I ignored the AEs for now. We'll see if any of those draw in. Generally, in races like this, what I like to do is I find the horse that ran the best last race speed figure and try to use them as my guidepost when it looks so wide open as this. In this case, that was the number 12 on Dioro. He ran a 104 TimeformUS last time out. He was drawn wide that day as he is today. He finished second behind Warriors Map in a race that several of these come out of. I do worry a bit about the post, so it's not like I think he's a cinch in this field. He's far from it. It's a pretty wide open field. So I did start looking at some others, and the horse to beat for me is going to be the 4-horse Aztec Empire. He's a horse who seems to be improving. He ran a really good race for Ronald Moquette last time when he was third. He did finish behind on Dioro that time out, but I like how he was up closer to the pace. He does draw a lot further inside, and I just think he has some things going for him in here that some others don't. Wild Union is a morning line favorite. I went and watched the replay a couple times as several had run in here. I just didn't see any real excuses for him last time out. He did finish third, but visually and speed figure wise, it just wasn't that impressive to me. It's always dangerous to throw out a Brad Cox horse, but this is one I don't particularly like. Copper King's another in here that usually takes some money, but he has that feel of a professional maiden to me. He's a horse who always gets bed, he gets checks, but he just doesn't win. So if I had to pick one in here, it would be Aztec Empire with On Dioro, the obvious second choice for me.
Yeah, we view this, well, the horses you mentioned, we view pretty similarly. I mean, Wild Union and Copper King arguably go out for the best barns, Brad Cox and Steve Asmussen, but they both have that same look to them. They just are, as you said, professional maidens. They're short prices. They're always right there. They just don't get the job done. And for me, they've each run out of chances. Of the horses coming out of that Warriors Map race, I agree with you that Aztec Empire is probably the one you want. He just seemed like he ran in spots that day, looked like he might have been at a horse coming to the quarter pole, but I liked how resurgent he was in the stretch of that race. He was really coming on, actually running by on Doro after the wire that day. So he seems like one that has more ability than we've seen so far. You know, he's a 4-year-old facing some 3-year-olds, but I still think we haven't quite seen the best of him. So I would definitely use Aztec Empire. On Doro, he's got solid form, but again, he's one you could put in that category of professional maidens. I know that he's been bigger prices in a lot of his races, but he still had plenty of chances. The one horse that you didn't mention that I like quite a bit in this race is the number 8, Mow and Go. He's a little bit inconsistent. I get that. But going back to his 2-year-old season, this horse going 1 mile and an eighth in that really tough 2-year-old maiden race, the one that they run at that distance in Saratoga, he was second to Enforceable that day, got a 96 TimeformUS speed figure all the way back in August of his 2-year-old season. Now, I know he hasn't built on it since then, but theoretically, he should be able to run faster now. He's second off the layoff for Jeremiah Engelhardt, and while he didn't run great last time in his first start down at Oaklawn Park, he also didn't get the most comfortable trip that day because he did save ground the entire way, but he never really got into the clear. He was always down inside, in behind horses, didn't exactly have a clear path through the lane. So he's one that I think might be able to improve a little bit. Going from the mile to 1 mile and a 16th should help him a little, and he's got some tactical speed, and he's just not quite as exposed as some of the others, so he should be a decent price, and I'll go with Mow and Go as my top pick in the finale.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Taking a new shooter, kind of coming in against horses that a lot of them faced each other last time, and a lot of them just don't seem to have that will to win. So no problem with that selection for me at all.
Just to kind of recap things for this pick four sequence, it sounds like we're kind of on the same page about ticket structure. Personally, for me, I would spread in that wide open seventh race, even spread in this last race, and try to narrow things down a little bit in the eighth and ninth. Focus mostly on the favorites, particularly Frank's Rocket for me and the Purple Martin, and that heavy favorite Answer in the eighth race.
Yeah, I think we're basically on the same page. Pretty tough, couple tough races and a couple where I think the chalk's pretty strong. So I don't want to go against them too heavily.
Let's finish things up at Gulfstream Park. We're going to talk about two allowance races from there, the 10th and 11th races. The 10th race is an optional claiming with a claiming price of $100,000. I think there are actually a couple in here for that price with some allowance conditions attached to it. And this is a pretty high quality allowance field. You've got some horses that are coming out of stakes events, some even coming out of graded stakes races. There are many ways to go in this race. The one thing that I'm pretty sure we're going to agree on is that 6-1 morning line on Halliday seems like a pipe dream, because to me, Halliday looks like the horse to beat and the probable favorite in this race.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I have to be honest, this race I probably spent 3 times as much time as I did on any other race we're going to talk about, just because of the depth of the field, how contentious it is. I think I counted, there's actually 5 stakes winners in this field. There's a couple graded stakes place horses. So just a really strong field. It's a big field. The pace projector thinks the pace is going to be hot, and I would tend to agree with that. We have some horses coming off of really long layoffs. We have trainer changes, class drops, class rises. Probably every angle you could ever want to look for, you would find in here. It's just so many ways you could go in here. I'll let you start on this one.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything you said. There are a lot of horses to consider, and we could really kind of talk about every horse in the race. We're not going to, but there's an interesting angle for almost every horse. So I'm a little disappointed, I guess, at the end of my handicapping that I ended up settling on who I think are going to be the short prices in this race. I have no problem with Halliday. I just think he ran pretty well in the Tampa Bay Stakes last time. I know that race was won in an upset by Admiralty Pier, who I think we both feel could have been taken down in that race. But March the Arch, who finished just ahead of him, I mean, he ran well last weekend in that stakes race. And Halliday, I think, was even stuck on the also eligible list for that race, as was First Premio. They're both now in this optional claiming race, setting their sights a bit lower. And Halliday, to me, if he can overcome this outside post position, he figures to be right there. And he also figures to appreciate this cut back to the 1 mile distance, which I think is much more in his wheelhouse than a mile and the 16th. But if I had to put a horse on top, it would be the other favorite, First Premio. This one, I know that he's not exactly a winning type lately. He's been off the board in some recent starts, but they tried some pretty tough spots with him in 2019, and he actually gave a pretty solid account of himself in most of those races, especially last time in that Grade 1 Shadwell Turf Mile. Not the toughest Grade 1 turf event that we've ever seen, but still a tougher field than this. And he was closing well at the end to just lose, finishing fourth by under a length behind Bowie's Hero and Diamond Oops. And I just think this is a 1 mile specialist who's going to get a good trip here from the 3-post under Tyler Gaffalione. Looks like Mark Cassidy has him ready to go off the layoff. I just thought he was the most likely winner.
Yeah, I would agree he's the most likely winner. If anything, I mean, Mark Cassidy, he doesn't do bad with layoffs like this. It's not a strong stat, but it's not a bad one either. I think he's clearly the fastest horse, the classiest horse in here. So I have no problems with he being the first, the top pick. This is a race, if I was playing pick fours, or I don't really play pick fives, but if I were playing pick fours, I would spread in here for sure. It's just a deep field, and I think you might be able to catch a price, but I'll be darned if I could tell you who it is. The one price horse I kind of kept falling back on was Penalty, the 9 horse for Bill Mott. He's a horse who just seems to be getting better for me. He's a newly turned 5-year-old. His race off the layoff last time when he won over this same course was probably the best of his career. And he's just one that I think is going to get a decent setup. So I will probably use him in exactas with the 2 horses you talked about, First Premio and Holiday, and just hope that that he runs a good one. If he's anywhere near that 12-1 morning line, I will probably have some win money on him as well.
Yeah, to me, the 12-1 looks a little bit high, but not nearly as high as the 30-1 that he was last time. I don't know how he went off at that price, because this horse actually showed some ability last year as a 4-year-old in 2019. And I agree, if the pace is hot, I think he's the most appealing of the late runners outside of those two favorites. So I would definitely use penalty somewhere. The one horse that I would throw in at a price, and I do think he's going to be a much bigger price than his 9-2 morning line, is the number 4, Dr. Shane. This is a horse who really lost all chance at the start last time in that stakes race. He was just off very slowly, and he actually did fine to split the field in the end, because he's not a horse that typically wants to pass a lot of horses in the lane. Danny Gargan has been on this ridiculous run so far in 2020, winning at nearly 40%. So you dismiss his horses at your own peril. And Dr. Shane does have some back speed figures that make him competitive in this race. And the 1 mile distance, maybe it's a bit far, but he's going to be more forwardly placed this time. And he's just one that scares me a little bit. So I'd use him as sort of a backup in this race.
Yeah, I would even add a horse I would throw in as Croy, the other Danny Gargan horse in here, just because of how ridiculously hot he's been. I don't have any particular strong angles on him other than Danny Gargan, but it's hard to ignore that win percentage he's had.
We'll finish up this podcast with race 11 at Gulfstream Park on Saturday. It's an optional claiming 75,000, non-winners of one event for the 3-year-olds, going 7 furlongs, and the favorite in this race is going to be the number 3, I'll Fight Dempsey. This was a horse that was bet down to favoritism in his debut for Todd Pletcher. The word was out, and this one delivered, winning that race by 2.5 lengths, going 6 furlongs, holding off another highly touted firster for Chad Brown, that horse named Candy Machine. I'll Fight Dempsey has come back since then. He's worked 3 bullets in a row. Looks like this horse has all the hallmarks of a heavy favorite.
It does, but I'm probably going to take a shot against him in here. He is a horse we show on a clear lead, but on the pace projector, but I'm not so sure. And as a morning line favorite, he's one I want to beat. He has just that one start. It was a clear lead, wire-to-wire win, and he doesn't have much of a speed figure edge on the field, if any at all, on a couple of these horses. So, well, I mean, it wouldn't shock me if he won. He's not a horse I'm in love with, and one I definitely do want to take a shot against. I like a couple of horses in here, and they're the 2 outside horses. Master Day, who's 8-1 in the morning line. He's dropping out of that Fountain of Youth, returning to a sprint. He's got improving speed figures every time out, and he just looks like one that I think might appreciate the turn back. He might get a little bit of a setup if things get hot in here. You kind of have to count on that, but he did run well sprinting his first time out, and I think maybe they just got a little overly ambitious with him. The other one is Acre, who's coming back from Bill Mott. I've already talked about Bill Mott off a layoff a couple times during this podcast, but he's the other one for me. He showed a lot of promise early on, and Mott, once again, he excels with this kind of layoff, so I fully expect better speed figures than he ran as a 2-year-old back at Saratoga, and with any kind of good trip in here, I think he's a danger as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not way against I'll Fight Dempsey, and I think there is a scenario where he does just either stalk the number 5 Ralston or get loose from that horse, because I don't see a whole lot of speed outside of the 3 and the 5, or at least not real sprint speed. So I don't want to take a big stance against I'll Fight Dempsey. The 2 horses that you mentioned, they'll be big enough prices, so I'm not going to knock them at all. Acre actually does have a really nice pedigree. He's a half brother to Lee, the sire and the Don handicap winner. So he definitely has the potential to improve on that 2-year-old form, even though he's going to need to. I went in a different direction to take a slight shot against I'll Fight Dempsey, and that was with the likely second choice, Sonneman. Sonneman's a horse that I thought showed real potential as a 2-year-old. He wasn't quite ready for his debut at Saratoga last summer, but he took a big step forward next time out behind Famish, who has since gone on to do nice things on the turf. And I really liked his last race, winning that 1 mile maiden race at Belmont in October. That seemed like a pretty strong field at the time. Cost Basis, the runner-up, came back and ran a nice race to break his maiden on that Cigar Mile undercard after that. And Sonoman just feels like the type that might be able to take that step forward from 2 to 3 for Mark Hennig. He's one that will need some pace to close into, but he's another horse in this race that has the pedigree to really get better with added distance, which he's not getting here, but also added experience and just maturity. His dam Zardana is probably one you remember. She was that filly who upset Rachel Alexandra at that New Orleans Ladies Classic a number of years ago when Rachel made her 4-year-old debut. So this one does have the pedigree to be a nice horse, probably going longer, like I said. But I don't think he's that far behind I'll Fight Dempsey, just based on natural talent. We'll see how the pace shakes out.
Yeah, I have no problem with him. He's just a horse. Mark Hennig's not really great with these layoffs, and mostly the 5-2 price turned me off. Between the 3 and the 4, I would probably prefer the 3, but I could see him running well in this spot, and I think it's going to prove to be a pretty strong race.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. There's definitely potential in this race. Like I was saying, horses with big pedigrees, so it's not going to be surprising if some of these go on to do nice things later in the year. Well, that's all the stakes race. I shouldn't say stakes racing. That's all the racing we'll discuss for this week. Hopefully we get some more stakes racing in the coming weeks, but I think we'll continue to do these podcasts, even the handicapping podcast, because the racing's been great at the tracks that they're running at. And I think these are still worth discussing. So hopefully we gave out some good ideas this week. And as always, you can listen to both of our podcasts, the TimeformUS Forecast, where we handicap these races, and the TimeformUS Pacecast, where we do race recaps on Tuesday. You can listen to them on drf.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Craig, great to talk about the races this week. We'll recap these on Tuesday, and thanks for listening this week.